Hello and welcome to the Clean Energy Pod, powered by SSE, your guide to the people and technologies delivering the clean energy transition. On this edition, we speak to the boss here at SSE, Alistair Phillips-Davies, the Chief Executive. We'll talk a little bit about how the company's performed in the last 12 months, but most of our conversation is about where SSE is investing more than £20 billion by 2027, and much more than that in the years afterwards. So where's the cash going? Let's find out. First of all, let's kick off with how you've performed in the last 12 months or so. Energy markets seem as if they've been very volatile. How is SSE doing in that kind of environment?
Yes, I think that's right. I think we've seen the world be quite volatile, quite changeable, not that easy to predict. And yet our business model that I think has been quite deliberately constructed has proved very resilient against that. So we've announced good profits, 158.5p, which is only just below where we were last year at 166p, but obviously in very, very different markets. I think across the board, we've seen all the businesses perform. You've got some of those very energy markets related businesses like thermal was down a bit. Networks came through particularly strongly in the transmission section. And we've seen renewables up considerably as well, particularly on the back of increased volumes. Full year of Sea Green and some of the onshore projects as well. So I really like where we are at the moment, and the fact that it was a more difficult year and that we powered on through that, and we've given good guidance, I think, for the year we're in now, and particularly going forward out to 27, because we've got a lot of capex to spend. We've got great projects that are ongoing at the moment. We've got real visibility on delivering. Means we can be very confident in the future. So a very strong year for us.
You continue to invest more than you make in profits. So for some people out there might think, well, actually, how are you managing to do that? Why is that a sensible approach? Just talk us through what the business is, why the business is investing at the scale it is at the moment.
Yeah, and it's simply because of the opportunities. We've got huge opportunities in our businesses. So a few years ago, we endeavoured to go through like a £3 billion plus disposal program. So we exited our gas business, we exited waste to energy, a number of other things, and indeed sold down 25% of our transmission business because of the scale of the capex required. And we knew even then, 2 or 3 years ago, that we were likely to be investing more each and every year of the entire 2020s than we were making in profits. And so that's why we also reshaped the dividend as well. So, first of all, we strengthened the balance sheet, got cash in, and really focused on the electricity business and the electricity transition, and then cut the dividend. I think paying dividends absolutely right. It's what we believe in as a utility type company. Offering some return to shareholders is right, but trying to balance that with the sheer growth in the business. It would almost be rude and irresponsible to turn down the opportunities that we have. We were able to generate so many opportunities across the core businesses that we kept that all fitted together so well. We've committed to that programme. We've been strong on raising debt. We've got a strong balance sheet, triple B plus, which is great. And we've got strong earnings coming out of all the businesses. So we have a fully funded plan out to 27 to spend £20.5 billion on 90+% of that spend will be on green or energy transition assets, and really try and move society forward. I think we're very, very aligned with where governments and society are in terms of, one, keeping costs of energy down. We don't want to see a repeat of what's happened over the last few years. So if we can build more homegrown assets, we're going to be able to reward customers and consumers up and down this country with far more stable prices and indeed lower prices by the time you get to 2030 than if we hadn't built those assets. And then secondly, you get the decarbonisation angle as well, which so many people believe in. So that's all been great. And then one of the big challenges for us is getting enough people into the business, getting enough trained people, transitioning people from high carbon businesses into our business, which is a low carbon business. But yeah, fantastic array of opportunities, and we'll be working hard to finance all those.
Let me interrupt you very, very briefly. It's important with these podcasts that we hear from you as well. We're all learning in this clean energy transition. So please, if you can, click like, subscribe, and of course, leave your comments below. And for somebody who might not know the company that intimately, just take us back a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, to some of your thinking? Because you have changed the business quite a lot in recent years, and you have focused on these three big areas in terms of renewables and electricity networks and flexible power. But just talk us through that thinking. How did you get to that? Why are you focusing on those, and what are you seeing that maybe others weren't?
Yeah, so I suppose if we go back a decade or more now, for when I became chief executive, I think the customer business was a bigger, more important business, but that definitely has its issues in the UK. The retail customer sector in the UK has been tough. We had great foundations in that we had good networks businesses. We also, long time ago, myself and a colleague bought the electricity business, which was a renewables business way back in 2008, as we're really leaning into that low carbon agenda. And that, when we...
Did it just seem obvious to you then? Because that was early. So 2008, not many people were investing that much in renewables. So it wasn't really a market particularly. So what were you seeing back then?
I think for us, we just saw the huge opportunity of a move away from fossil fuels at that time, because the science was beginning to really take off, and things like The Inconvenient Truth video that was done by Al Gore. There was something we believed in. We were playing with a big trend, and it maybe took a bit longer than we thought, but it was definitely happening around that time, and it's just got stronger and stronger ever since, and that's been a huge benefit to us. I think equally what we're seeing now is the sort of sleeping giant of that is actually rebuilding the networks. So rather than running networks from old coal mines where they were powered by coal-fired power stations, you've now got to run them offshore to offshore wind farms. You've got to run them more remote and high up places where, again, you can get wind, and then where the solar farms and other things of that nature. So networks has been the real beneficiary, I think, over the last couple of years, when people have leaned into how do we connect up all this new generation, and then how do we actually bring it into people's homes and businesses up and down the country. And then finally, as we lose some of we've lost pretty much, or we've lost all the coal in the UK now, and we'll lose more and more gas stations, how do we build flexible, low carbon thermal? And here again, the UK's got great opportunities. That oil and gas industry means we've got lots of carbon stores offshore. Building a whole carbon capture industry for the UK is a massive opportunity for it, given that it could do carbon capture and storage for a lot of Northeast Europe, basically. So there are some great business models in there, and for us, we were always playing with those kind of trends. And perhaps one of the big things that was perhaps a surprise to some people was exiting the domestic retail business in the UK. But for a business that was worth maybe 5% of what the group was worth at that time, it was kind of taking 30-40% of senior management's time, because it was quite a political football, and I think freeing us of that and allowing us to really focus on the assets really got the business to blossom in terms of focusing on the areas where we as a company could really add value to the country and society generally.
I think on renewables, people that gets lots of attention. You can see some of the massive projects that are taking place, Dogger Bank, off the Yorkshire coast, with the world's biggest offshore wind farm, for instance, which SSE is building. But to your point on electricity networks, essentially the cables that join up the electricity infrastructure, why do you think that's been kind of underappreciated? There's no point in building all this stuff offshore or onshore if you can't plug it in. Why do you think it's not got the attention that perhaps it deserves?
I think because they were seen as steady, slow, boring businesses. When I first came into the industry, generally electricity demand used to grow at about half of GDP. Suddenly we've got this really, really big societal change that's a once in a generation change from certain types of generation, thermal generation in particular, to something completely different. And actually reconfiguring the networks is critical. Networks aren't the biggest part of the bill by any means, but they're essential to make sure that we can get those new, cheaper, low carbon sources of energy over there into consumers' homes and businesses.
Now, you're an early mover in renewables. You've got a big electricity networks business, and you've talked about the thermal business, which used to have coal assets, now has gas assets, and you've talked about maybe moving to carbon capture and to hydrogen. That feels like three bits of a jigsaw. Are those three pillars, are they inevitable? Do they have to happen, or are you taking a bit of a risk here? Is there a chance that one of these doesn't actually come to fruition?
I think they're absolutely inevitable. Ultimately, people want certainty of supplies. You're going to need that flexibility. Ultimately, we don't want to be relying on importing gas from far-flung places with regimes that we maybe no longer believe in, and with hugely volatile prices. So the opportunity to bring energy home and to harvest what is an enormous amount of resource around the coast of the UK and Ireland is going to be really important. And then building the networks to do that, just reconfiguring them, is a natural consequence of doing that. But ultimately, mankind, the human race, has benefited enormously from electricity. Anyone on the planet that doesn't have electricity really, really struggles. If you want to become a modern, well-developed society, electricity is absolutely critical. Or good sources of reliable energy are absolutely critical. I don't think the public are going to accept, if the wind doesn't blow, you can't charge your phone up or you can't watch your TV. So again, that's why that flexibility is important. So the three pieces are all there. I think it's just the pace at which each of them move. And whereas we thought it was going to be 40-40-20, networks, renewables, flexibility.
In terms of investment? In
terms of investment and what we do, at the moment we're probably more like 55% networks. We're going stronger on networks and maybe 35% on renewables and 15%, so 10% on flexibility. And I think for us, we've got that portfolio that can pivot, and we've also got the discipline that says let's build the projects where you can make sensible returns, and that's really important. It's part of fundamentally a sustainable business model. If you start building projects that you're losing money on, people are going to stop investing money in you. They're not going to trust you anymore to do that, and so therefore that's been a critical piece of what we've done is try and flex that, while also trying to make sure that governments and regulators are very, very clear on what needs to be done in what sort of time frames. And I think we've just had some particular successes with the regulator leaning into that networks investment so that we can enable all the other investments to hang off it.
It does seem from an outside perspective that you've talked about a once in a lifetime opportunity, once a generation opportunity. Is that fully appreciated? You look at some other big societal trends, AIs particularly, being talked about at the moment. But do you think out there, whether it's amongst policymakers, investors, whoever else, people understand the growth opportunity for electricity, just because the world is changing and probably the 2020s, 2030s is going to be the decade when it changes?
Yes. I think people do, but it probably goes in waves. People have perhaps heard a bit of it and they move on to something new and different. And you mentioned AI, which will obviously, hopefully, ultimately have an enormously positive impact on lots of our lives and lots of people's lives. But it is interesting at the moment, a lot of these AI chips that in order to do a search, an AI search, I think takes somewhere between 8 and 10 times as much energy as a Google search. And so there's another opportunity there. So as some people focus all on AI, electricity demand is going to be going up and up and up moving forward. And so somehow we need to deal with that. So I think ultimately we're at the heart of all of the change and everything that goes on in sort of powering people's lives across the planet. It's important for us to do that. If people, which sort of stop realising that for a little while, I think they do come back to it. I think we've seen that a bit in share price performances across the sector. Recently, it was one of the poorer performing sectors for the first 2.5 months of the year. It's been one of the best performing sectors recently. Some of that's around interest rates, but also some of it's around a realisation. Once you slow down on building stuff, you don't notice immediately, but you will notice in a few years' time that there's big problems. And we've seen issues where you've had things like the capacity market that gives you an indication of whether people are concerned about whether there's enough energy out there to supply the market in 27 and 28, sort of 4 years out from now. Those prices have increased considerably in terms of what the market's offering to make sure that you've got plant there. So that's going to increase the confidence that we can have in order to build a number of the great assets and great options and opportunities that we have.
It's just so I understand that the capacity market essentially is telling investors like SSE, builders and SSE, that there's going to be constraints, there's going to be tight supply, so please have your plant available.
Yeah, and we've seen prices in that market go up 5-6 fold in terms of what you get paid to be on the system. So whereas last year we probably got 50 or 60 million pounds out of the capacity market, in 4 years' time we're expecting to get over 400 million pounds out of the capacity market for roughly similar capacity. We will have some new, but there's not a lot of new different plant in there in terms of flexible thermal plant. And so that's just telling you people need to start thinking about bringing more capacity on, because government and National Grid and regulators are predicting that the market's going to be a lot tighter. We're going to have more issues, and you can see that in a more rounded sense in Ireland, where they're building emergency generation now to just try and get themselves through the winter that's coming, and that mechanism is telling us that in the UK. So look, we continue to see more and more opportunities. Going back to that point you made at the start, is it renewables, networks and flexibility? It's absolutely all three of them. The key thing is picking your timing on when you go with different ones, depending on where government, regulators and indeed just the market or demands are happening out. Because I think it's easy sometimes to have a belief that I need to get to a certain stage by 2035 or 2040, but picking your timing for that is quite important, and we've certainly seen that in the share prices of ourselves and other people in the sector.
Let me interrupt you very, very briefly. It's important with these podcasts that we hear from you as well. We're all learning in this clean energy transition. So please, if you can, click like, subscribe, and of course, leave your comments below. And SSE is quite focused, or principally focused, on the UK and Ireland as your two main markets, with some, you've been expanding recently internationally, but very, very focused in UK and Ireland. Why is that? Are these particularly good markets to be in from some of the demand trends you talked about, or the regulatory policy perspective? Why are you so focused on these markets in particular?
They were the markets that we knew best. I think we've done a good job of working well and strongly in those markets, and there are a lot of opportunities there. As you rightly point out, we'll be investing more than we make for the balance of this decade and beyond each and every year, and certainly to the end of the decade, principally that investment's going to be in the UK and Ireland. So we've got a huge amount of opportunities. I think it's right to try and find one or two more markets, a bit like we did with Ireland. We weren't in Ireland at all prior to the electricity acquisition back in 2008. And so, we've looked in Japan, where they import 95+% of their energy. They've got high need for coal and gas, and ultimately they will need to utilise renewables. So we've had a look there, and there are some selected European geographies, where Spain, Italy, France, we've started building each of those. We're also looking in Poland and 1-2 other places. So again, trying to find some other markets that provide some diversity to what we're doing, and it's where we've got skills in terms of what we can build and what we can bring to that market from a build, trading, and ultimately end user customer corporate PPA type background, and putting those end-to-end offers in, sort of taking the models that we've got in the UK and Ireland and taking them elsewhere.
You think they will travel?
Some of them will travel, and we're in a process of finding out which ones are going to work. And we'll do that. But as I said, UK and Ireland will remain the principal place for us to invest certainly over the balance of this decade. But we'd like to grow some other geographies.
And you've talked about the growth opportunity you have, and we know that SSE is one of the biggest builders of renewables anywhere in the world at the moment. But that, particularly offshore, it's had some issues in the last couple of years. Whether you've seen some of the technology providers struggling for profitability, for instance, and some other issues around the industry. How do you see that? Are these just teething troubles of a kind of still maturing industry, or how are you thinking about these things?
It's unfortunate. Some of the supply chain have had problems, and also some of the developers as well. I think it's a reflection on people perhaps viewing the goals, the 2030 goals, the 2035 goals, as absolutely given, and perhaps running a little bit too hard at that in an environment when suddenly we saw tragedy of the war in Ukraine, huge additional impact on supply chain, because you layered that on top of COVID, and sort of you've got a a deglobalization and significant inflation, particularly in some aspects of the supply chain, that created a lot of problems. So for those people who are maybe willing to take some risk between at what price they were locking in their income stream and then weren't quite locking in their cost base quickly enough, then that's given some significant problems. Also, just locking supply chain actual availability, as we've talked about, there's a huge jump in the amount of network builds going on, and therefore HVDC cables and converters and things like that. There's, to us, there's sort of three people out there, three key partners in sort of Hitachi, Siemens, and GE making a lot of this equipment. They've got to scale up, but they need the certainty too. And you put these bumps in the road as well for some of them where they've lost money for various reasons because supply chain's gone wrong on them. It's just been a confluence of factors, but COVID and the war and the sort of the reversal of a global peace dividend and the general deglobalization, all of them have given difficulties, and that's particularly impacted as well. I suppose if you go into the offshore market, you've got technology advances helped us drive down the cost of offshore wind by close to 70%, up to about 2020, 2021 time, or around the time COVID was really hitting. And then these issues now, although people hope that we could carry on, I think the technology's got so big and difficult and tricky that people are struggling now to deliver, and actually prices are starting to go back up again. You need to put enough money in to get these projects going. They can be huge. You mentioned Dogger Bank, the world's largest offshore wind farm we're doing. That's a £9 billion project. Hasn't been straightforward. We and our technology partners have had issues, but I think through careful management of hedging, locking in the supply chain, also being very, very clear how we deal with the financing, we've been able to keep our returns at sensible levels. We haven't taken write-downs on any of those things, and we continue to work to try and deliver that a little bit later than we'd hoped, but still with sensible returns for everybody. And that's the critical piece about probably managing end-to-end risk, understanding financing, supply chain, and delivery, and being really, really focused on managing those returns which you're sort of getting out of those projects. And it's something maybe we've been a little bit fortunate on the way through, but I think we work pretty hard at trying to make sure that happens, and that that there are some people that unfortunately have struggled a little bit with that, and you've seen the problems out there.
Let me ask you about the policy environment as well, though. Clearly, policymakers are really critical to this energy transition. A common complaint is it just takes too long to get these things built. I mean, is that what you're seeing, and what would be your remedy, especially given the fact we're probably going to have lots of new administrations around the world this year? What would be your advice to policymakers of how they actually get this transition accelerated?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that when we build big new infrastructure that we consult on it. We're doing big consultations in the north of Scotland at the moment. I think they're the biggest consultations Scotland's ever seen on new transmission lines. So we recently ran over 40 sort of literally town hall meetings, and we're taking in and processing lots and lots of sort of information from the public. And we're going to go out to one more set of consultations before we finalise our plans, and that'll be 3 sets of big consultations. We've been there, obviously hearing from statutory consultees on marine welfare and birds and things like that when you're doing offshore wind farms. All that is important, but some of these things do take a long time. If you end up with a public inquiry and then you don't get a result coming out of the public inquiry for 4 years afterwards, we've got 2 public inquiries that we've had at the moment. One of them's we're still waiting for decisions on both. One's 18 months afterwards and the other one's 2 years. I think we need statutory timeframes there. Can we have a public inquiry and agree that we're going to get it done within 12 months? Sort of taking 12 years plus to build an offshore wind farm seems a long time. Either tell us yes or tell us no, because you're on those things where ultimately the answer is no. You're burning cash all the time, and I don't see a lot having been done in this country over the last decade. A lot of people have talked about trying to improve consenting, but I don't think it's really happened in terms of what we see on the ground. And so therefore having clear processes, investing in planning officers and people who can do it, because we've certainly as a renewables industry paid hundreds of millions of pounds to governments for seabed and seabed leases. can we reinvest some of that in these consultation consenting processes in terms of the people who are doing it? And for new administrations coming in, I think taking some powers to make sure that there are statutory timeframes and that they do perhaps identify the most critical assets or projects, and that they have a better defined process around how those get built, so that ultimately, if it is that important for society, we will have to find a route to put a line down, or we will have to find a place to situate it, and not everybody will be happy.
Another topic that you focused a lot on whilst running SSE has been something called the just transition. What is that, and why are you focused on it so much?
We're very confident that we're going to deliver lower price energy to people. In our view, there's a pact with society that we do that in a responsible way, and part of that responsibility is around creating good jobs. And equally, if we're moving away from coal and oil and things like that, how do we take people from those industries and retrain them and make sure that we are offering good new green jobs in new industries that'll give you 20 or 30 years worth of growth and a big career. And so that's really what that just transition's about. And to put into practice, Beatrice, which was our first big offshore wind farm in Scotland, about 70% of the people working there in the control room are working up in Wick in the north of Scotland. They'd come from the oil and gas industry. We retrained them. Huge amount of skills with those people anyway, but sort of retraining them to make sure that they could come and work on our assets. And so for us, it's a little bit about investing back, or making sure that we're working with the colleges, local authorities, governments, whoever, to make sure that we invest back in people to ensure that they can get good jobs, because it's important for us that we're seen as being a responsible member of society in terms of what we're doing. And I think we've had some successes on that as a company. I think we're the first company globally to produce a just transition strategy and plan. And we've updated that recently, and we continue to engage widely on that with people, and it generally goes down positively, and it gives us a license to operate, it gives us a license to build these assets and to do these things, because we're trying to do it in a way that's sensitive and responsible to communities up and down this country. The year before last, with the cost of living crisis, we chose not to earn any money in our customer business, because we were doing quite well in the asset business. So there are maybe, there's a slightly different set of priorities for us as a business. We've got to just get on with doing our business. And I think it's important with absolute essentials like electricity, water and things like that. You've got to have, a sensible pact with society about what your place is. And I think you can earn money, but you've got to earn that money sensibly and responsibly and sustainably. And that's what we're about. But we've got fantastic opportunities. I think we've got a great decade plus ahead of us as a company, and you can see a lot of the projects now. You can see us delivering a lot of them as well. So I can only see it going from strength to strength. And look, if people are out there listening and you're interested in this stuff, we're expanding, we're growing. Come and get a job with us and build a career.
Alistair, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us. We hope that was valuable for you. What was the one thing that will stick in your head from this conversation? Let us know in the comments below. And as I've said multiple times in this, we're all learning this clean energy transition. So if you've learned something new in this podcast, please share it with your friends or colleagues, and certainly give us a like or a subscribe. Look forward to seeing you again soon.